Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1993 sequel, Another Stakeout. Now, this is one of those sequels that is not only too many years too late, but it's also very tired, it's very predictable, it's very lazy, it's very forgettable. And so you're probably wondering, why is this not a rant then? Because it's the type of forgettable and bad that's just barely below average. So it's technically tolerable and almost a time waster. The reason why this movie ultimately isn't able to even get to the average level of entertainment for me is solely because of Rosie O'Donnell. She is so annoying and obnoxious and unfunny in this that she just permeates this noxious odor throughout every scene that she's in. And that is really the main reason why this isn't something that I could, put on a rainy day. And it's a shame because there are a lot of things about this sequel that should make this work. John Badham is back behind the camera as the director. Richard Dreyfuss and Emilio Estevez are back as Bill and Chris. Jim Koof wrote the script, just like he wrote the script for the first one. So you would think that, okay, you got the same director, pretty much the gang's all here, but we got this unwanted guest at the party in Rosie O'Donnell, who's just making everything kind of suck. And it's disappointing, and it's annoying. You're like, just get out of here. Get out of here, Gina. We didn't ask for Gina. Why is Gina here? Why is Rosie O'Donnell in this movie? Go away. The formula with Stakeout was fine. It was one of the top 10 highest grossing films of 1987, and it was critically acclaimed. They bring in Rosie O'Donnell's character and try to shove her in this party and with these two characters and try to make a duo into a trio, and it gets terrible reviews from critics, and it was a bomb. Yeah, maybe you shouldn't have fucked with what was working. But anyway, the film, like I said, it's directed by John Badham, and his direction is fine. It's not as good as his direction in Stakeout or in other films, even after this. I'm wondering if part of that is due to the fact that this film was trimmed heavily, apparently, so it could get a PG-13, which I think is stupid anyway. Why did they do that? The first film was rated R and made a good amount of money. It's 1993. You probably are still going to get a decent box office with an R rating. I don't know why they thought it had to be PG-13. Maybe because John Badham did Bird on a Wire and that was PG-13, but I don't get it. I really don't understand. And speaking of Bird on a Wire, like the PG-13 rating didn't seem to affect the consistency of the film's tone or the edge that film had. I was really surprised by the edge that film had with its action sequences. Here, that's completely missing, completely gone, and it just feels dull and plays out that way. And there's a lot of scenes in this where, other than sequences where there's like a big explosion, like the house at the start of the movie, which admittedly is a really impressive practical explosion. It's a good way to start the film off with a bang. It just never really recovers from that, or tops it, or even comes close to that throughout the rest of the movie. Also, it makes the same mistake that Stakeout did at times, where it splits up Emilio Estevez and Richard Dreyfuss for good chunks of the movie. Those two together is the biggest selling point and the biggest draw with this film and with this potential franchise. It's not with Richard Dreyfuss and Rosie O'Donnell or the three of them together at some dinner party. It's with the two of them playing off one another and just throwing barbs at each other. That is the strength of Stakeout. And when you make it so the two of them don't share as much screen time together one on one as a duo, then you just limit what the film can do and what John Badham can do as a filmmaker, because he's good at working with these interactions and making them pop on the screen. He can only do so much. He can only work with what he has. And when you've got Rosie O'Donnell, who's just popping in and with her dog like it's a Beethoven movie, like it's just one of those things where it doesn't mesh. And the scenes with her and Emilio and Richard Dreyfuss, they just come across as very forced and painfully unfunny, and they drag, and she doesn't have any chemistry with the two of them either, and she just drags everything down, and John Badham can only do so much. And you even have like Miguel Ferrer, who plays the hitman, the villain, who's trying to hunt down Cathy Moriarty's character, who is a potential mob informant. And you got this mob boss that hired Miguel Ferrer to take her out. And those are capable performers too. But like I said, they're let down by a lot of the just puzzling decisions when it comes to the creative process and the casting process of this film. But yeah, the direction, it's not the best. It's not the worst either. There's some nice looking shots in Vegas as well. Decent establishing shots here and there. Some of the action, like some of the stuff with the car, is kind of fun. But there's just so much of it that's just very bland, very boring. Even the stakeout house that they use is a little too nice, a little too clean, a little too prim and proper. Doesn't have the same interesting dynamic as the worn down, dilapidated building that they were staying in the first movie. So there's not much that Badham can do to make the setting pop either, because it's just one of those things where it's so picturesque of a setting that he might as well be shooting a real estate ad. But yeah, I'm not blaming John Badham, because he's not the one that wrote the script, and he's probably not the one that championed for Rosie O'Donnell to be added to the cast either. Jim Koof, though, I will point a target at him, because a lot of this film's issues really come down to the script. The plot in the first film was formulaic, but there was enough going for it with the characters and some of the other aspects of the story to still make it work. Here, it's equally as formulaic, but there are a lot of disadvantages and a lot of things that just provide too many pitfalls and too many moments for the screenplay to trip over itself. And that's exactly what happens here. Like I said earlier, there's too many scenes where Richard Dreyfuss and Emilio Estevez aren't together. There's a whole chunk of the film where Emilio Estevez is trapped in a basement, tied up to a chair. So it's completely wasted in those scenes. You have Richard Dreyfuss trying to carry scenes with Rosie O'Donnell, and it's a massive fail. The way that Jim Koof wrote Gina doesn't help either, because she's not likable. She comes across as kind of bitchy at times and just not a very likable character. And then on top of that, there's a line of dialogue that sounds like something you'd hear nowadays, where she starts talking about how men are sexist. And that was like an immediate instance of me just hating that character even more, because now she just comes across as sanctimonious and preachy. So before she was kind of bitchy and shrill, and now she's sanctimonious and preachy. Also, because of the casting, you don't buy Rosie O'Donnell in any sequence that involves anything with a gun or any kind of action sequence. And that's putting your story at a serious disadvantage. And plus the whole stuff with the potential mob informant who is hiding at this in this house. Um, yeah, Luella, because she doesn't want to get hit by the mob, and the mobster uh, boss hiring a hitman to try to find her and kill her. Like, that stuff is just so generic and just been there, done that. There's nothing to that. They try to do something with Dennis Farina's character, who lives in the house next door, next to the stakeout house, or actually lives in the stakeout house, the house that they're staking out. So they try to do stuff with Brian and Pam O'Hara, but it doesn't necessarily click, at least not that consistently. And there are moments where you got some fun little callbacks to the first film, like one of the detectives who was warring with Bill and Chris in the first movie. He's now the new police captain, so he's got his dog there, and there's a fun little bit of business there between him and Chris and Bill. You got the whole sequence in the beginning where Chris and Bill are involved in another chase with another perp, and Bill is the one that gets covered in fish this time, and Chris essentially winks at the camera a little bit, and I thought that was kind of fun because it was one of those like, aha, like, now you get the fish. And Richard Dreyfuss's character still winds up getting dirty though, and covered in even more trash and garbage because he's trying to take out this one perp, and even loses his gun and has a fish in the holster instead. So that was some fun stuff. Like, that reminded me of the fun silliness from the first movie. And they're trying to do some stuff with the whole bit where Chris and Bill have to play father and son. So Emilio is messing with him and calling him dad. And there's some fun banter with that particular bit. But there's only so much they can do. I mean, there's a whole running gag about Emilio's mustache, because he has to shave it off for some reason so he can look more like Chris's son. And he's talking to Dennis Farina about his mustache, and he's missing his mustache, and it's it's a mustache ride that goes on way too long. So it's one of those things where when you're down to mustache jokes, like, you are really hitting the bottom of the barrel. You got the silly, goofy dog shenanigans. Oh my god, the dog is chasing after the cat, and and I'm like, what am I watching? Am I watching Stakeout, or am I watching Beethoven? Like, get this out of here. Why is this even in the movie? And then the stuff with Rosie O'Donnell's character, and she's just, the way that character is written is just terrible. And then the moment at the end when she supposedly redeems herself just feels so forced and unearned. And even the whole stuff with Miguel Ferrer's hitman character, supposed to be tense and thrilling, but it just comes across as bland and just pretty banal. So, yeah, the script really wasn't the best. It's too bad. Jim Coof did a good job with the first film, but here, other than some moments with Bill and Chris, it just doesn't have the same strength or effectiveness or sense of consistent fun. The whole dinner party back and forth thing just really didn't do anything for me. Neither did the whole stuff where Chris is trying to reconcile with Madeline Stow's character Maria throughout the film, because she's gonna leave him, or she's already left him because he won't commit to marriage. And it's just one of those things where like this is just something out of a soap opera. And yeah, it's just not the best script. It really doesn't put these characters in the best situations to thrive. And speaking of these characters, man, then you got the cast. I mean, Richard Dreyfuss and Emilio Estevez, they're back as Chris and Bill. And they do a good job. They do fine. The two of them still have good chemistry. The two of them are really the main reason why this film is at all watchable. Other than maybe some moments of direction by John Badham. Because the two of them, they still enjoy each other's company. They still like working with one another. And when you get those scenes where the two of them are together and they're busting each other's balls and they're busting perps, like, that's fun. That's good. More of that. Less of Gina trying to sell her shit or trying to be funny and failing or doing the whole stuff at the dinner party where she's serving armadillo Fritos or some shit. Like, less of that. Less of that crap. More of Detective Chris and Bill on the case. Rosie O'Donnell, just absolutely horrendous. Like, horrible. Just atrocious. Zero chemistry with Richard and Emilio. Not much of a genuine screen presence. She's just loud. She's obnoxious. She's annoying. The character is completely and totally unlikable. You don't buy her in this role as an assistant DA. And you can just tell that she's way out of her league. She just cannot stand on her own feet in any sequence with Emilio, Richard, or Dennis Farina, or anyone else that's a capable veteran actor in this cast. She doesn't have nearly as much charisma as I think she thought she had, or the producers thought that she had. She definitely is not some rising star sort of talent. And she's not funny either. Like, she was probably cast to maybe be funny, to like add an extra funny dynamic to the cast, but she's not given funny lines to say, and her attempts to improvise all fall flat, and it just feels like a giant big fat waste of time and money, because you clearly had to pay her a decent amount of money to get her in the film. And in terms of a waste of time, it's a waste of time because you spent all this money to cast Rosie O'Donnell in this Stakeout sequel. I think that it would lead to the film making bigger bucks in the box office, and it massively underperforms and does far worse in the first movie. And all you do is just waste the time of the audience and Emilio and Richard by having them share screen time with such a raw and just not that capable actress in Rosie O'Donnell. So maybe, maybe a third member might have worked okay if you cast some other actress, somebody who has a little more charisma, has genuine chemistry with Emilio and Richard. Or better yet, just don't have another third wheel character to begin with. Just have these two. That's what the audience wanted. That's what critics probably wanted. Even though Roger Ebert gave this 3 stars, he said it was like chewing gum for the mind. I'm like, that's not really a good sign of a good movie, let alone like a 3-star film. Chewing gum is some of the most bland, just kind of palatable stuff you can have when it comes to candy. So that's not really high praise. But yeah, Rosie O'Donnell sucked in this. And you have Dennis Farina as Brian O'Hara. He's trying. There were some moments where he kind of made me chuckle because of what he's trying to do to get out of this dinner party. Like, oh, I got a headache, or oh, here's this here's dessert, and then he just eats it like super fast and then gives himself a brain freeze on purpose so he could get out of this dinner date even earlier. And he and Marcia Strassman, they actually have some chemistry. Dennis Farina, Marcia Strassman as Brian and Pam O'Hara. Cathy Moriarty, really not much of a role. She's in the beginning of the movie, has a whole near run-in with Miguel Ferrer's character, escapes a giant explosion, and somehow miraculously survives, disappears. Then you find out that she's hiding in the basement of the O'Hara's home, and then you have her just beating up on poor Emilio Estevez for a good chunk of her screen time until she ultimately gets saved by Richard and Emilio when they take out the. Oh, well, I think actually, doesn't Rosie O'Donnell, her character, also shoot Miguel Ferrer's character? But anyway, she gets rescued by the good guys, and then she decides to be a mob informant to take down the mob boss. So it just feels like kind of a waste of Cathy Moriarty too, because her character has not much depth to her, not much screen time, not much of anything. John Rubinstein as the district attorney who's corrupt, is working with the mob, and did okay with what he was asked to do. Miguel Ferrer, he was an intimidating presence as Tony, the mob hitman, but he just comes and goes so often throughout the running time that he's not able to really provide a consistent presence throughout the film. And on top of that, because of the fact that a lot of the violence, a lot of the edge that the film had was cut out so it could get a PG-13, his character doesn't have as much teeth. He doesn't have as many moments where he's sharp or able to really sink his teeth into this role or into the audience. So it's just one of those things where, yeah, it even feels like a waste of Miguel Ferrer. It was fun to see Larry B. Scott, who was in Revenge of the Nerds and a few other movies. He's in this as a garage attendant, and he had a fun little cameo. Honestly, he had enough chemistry with Richard and Emilio in that scene. I would have been fine if he was the third cop or someone who was asked to tag along with the two of them. That would have been better than Rosie O'Donnell. But really, the better alternative would be no one. Because that's not what Stakeout needed. Stakeout didn't need a third wheel. That's not what this franchise needed. And Madeline Stow's also in it in a bit role as Maria again. As an uncredited cameo. And she's fine too, but in the cast, just the biggest standout in the worst possible way is Rosie O'Donnell. You just take her out of this movie, and this film is average. You have her in this film, and it's below average, and it's frustrating and painful to watch when it comes to the sequences that she's featured heavily in. And you have some other aspects of the film. I mean, I guess I could mention like the cinematography, but it's very, middle of the road. So is the editing by Frank Morris. Arthur B. Rubinstein comes back to do the score and does another good job here. I wouldn't say it's as memorable or as strong overall as his score in the first Stakeout, but it's still good enough. The music from the soundtrack, I don't even remember anything. So that's another step down. Like the music in the soundtrack for Stakeout was pretty memorable. You had some Miami Sound Machine stuff, I think. You had, of course, Is It Love by Mr. Mister. I don't even know what was even featured on the soundtrack for this film. Probably some kind of bad hip hop or rap. If we're talking about like the 90s at this time, there were a lot of instances like that. Oh God, I'm just thinking about a nightmare scenario of like some really cringe rap song with Rosie O'Donnell rapping. I hope that doesn't actually exist. Like that Dragnet rap with Tom Hanks and Dan Aykroyd from the movie Dragnet, but this time it's with Rosie O'Donnell and like Richard Dreyfuss and Emilio Estevez. Like, God. Uh, Probably in some alternate universe of just cringe that would actually be a thing. But as you can see, I don't really have a whole lot to say about this movie at this point. It's lame, it's forgettable. It's one of those things where it's fun to see some of the cast again. But if you want to watch Emilio and Richard work together, just rewatch the first movie. It's definitely a much more satisfying experience than another Stakeout. There's a review that's shared on Wikipedia that I thought was actually pretty fitting. It's from Michael Wilmington of the L.A. Times. He says, "It's neither the best nor worst of a bloated lot of unimaginative sequels. It's pretty much what its title suggests: another Stakeout, another sequel, another day, another dollar." Yep, that's really the best way to sum up the film. Could have been a little bit more than that if you didn't have Rosie O'Donnell weighing down the whole film. But it is what it is. But yeah, that's my thoughts on another Stakeout. And as always, until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later. See ya.